some folks feel like D&D is the only option out there. It's the only system they can jump into. I think I would challenge anyone listening to this to use that as an opportunity to be curious. Ask about what else is out there. Always ask yourself questions and be curious.
There's an expansive world of tabletop and board gaming outside of the familiar realm of Dungeons and Dragons. David Masnato is a seasoned creator, community manager, and board game designer. He has experience in both the mainstream and indie board game communities. And so what that means is he's super swanky. His swankiness gives him a very unique perspective and vantage point in the gaming community. If you also are really swanky and want to share your stuff on the pod, feel free to click on the link in the show notes so that you can sign up to be my guest. Till that time, it's time for you to make your claim to game. Where did you get into game design? How did this story unfold for you?
Yeah, I mean, I like it. I think I had there are things about my game design journey that are unique, but the thing that is the same for most game designers is that it all begins with the like, I've been designing games for as long as I can remember. Like, I think most game designers, you talk to them and they say that same thing right away. And it's true for me. Like, I on an informal level, like, I've always been like coming up with things like to play with friends or family. But like on a more intentional and like hobbyist designer level, I started making my first games, I think in around 2017, 2018. I was playing a lot of games at the time that I felt like when I would invite friends over for game nights, we'd set the thing up and then I'd have to like preface every rules explanation with like an apology for all of the things that were about to happen, whether it was like themes that hadn't aged well or like opening a box that was like mostly beige and shades of brown with like a scowling man on the cover, like pushing coins across the table. Like when your friends come over for like a fun time and you're like, yeah, we're going to be like German aristocrats building bridges and trying to impress kings. Like, it doesn't exactly scream like, let's have fun.
Who doesn't want to be Ebenezer Scrooge for everybody's game night?
Oh, look, it's Ebenezer Scrooge. A goose for everyone.
Yeah. So I just found myself like craving games where I didn't have to open the night with an apology or an explanation of why we were doing this. And around that time, one of the games that came out that, you know, at this point, I feel like everybody knows about it, but like when Wingspan was released, that was kind of a major moment for the hobbyist game space, that like it was possible to have a wildly popular tabletop board game that lived in a theme and a world that wasn't as familiar to the traditional gaming audience. If you were listening to this and you don't know about Wingspan, it's wonderful. It's a
beautiful box,
sort of
beautiful art.
Beautiful art. It's a sort of Euro style board game where you are building out an aviary, and you're kind of acquiring these bird cards that they're all unique. They all have unique art. They all have unique abilities and actions and things associated with them. It's a wonderful game. I pretty much would recommend it to anybody who's like looking for something to jump into hobbyist games. And there were obviously designers who were doing things like this before Elizabeth designed Wingspan. But like Wingspan was a pretty big moment for the hobby that like proved that these kinds of things could exist and there was an audience for them. It almost felt like I like permission was being granted to like do the thing and like make the thing you want to see exist. So that's when I started working on my first game. And I've been working on versions of that game pretty much since then. It is feeling like it's close to the finish line. That game in 2022 won what's called the Cardboard Edison Award. It's for unpublished games. At the time, the game was called Roommates. It had a brief moment where it was with a publisher looking like it was going to get signed. That is no longer the case. They ended up not moving forward with the game. But that opened up a whole new journey for the game where I realized I was maybe trying to chase a specific need or want of the like hobbyist game market. And it got me thinking about, well, like, what if I tried something totally different with this and maybe brought it back to the roots of why I'm making these types of games and like why, like what brought me into this in the first place, try to make it less of like a thing that a publisher might traditionally gravitate towards and like maybe take some big swing risks, which I think kind of brings us back to the like, you know, how you sort of teed this all up with like, are there places where RPGs and board games could kind of intersect and mingle a little more than they traditionally have?
Yeah. I would love to play your game someday. It's not still called Roommates, is it? It's
No.
evolved.
No. So some things are happening with it. I've been working on a retheme. So right now the theme is up until recently, the players were witches going out on a retreat to learn spells and learn magic from a bunch of elder witches in the woods. But they all kind of shared this like lived space that they're occupying together. And the game is just kind of about a week in the lives of these people living together, like learning and cohabitating.
It's like my worst nightmare.
Yeah.
College was so hard with a roommate. If my roommate's listening, I'm sorry, but I'm not a shared space kind of person.
Can we turn our beds into bunk beds?
Yes.
I mean, this is like kind of my thing. It's like I make games that like on paper, like, oh, that's like, this sort of sounds a little bit like my personal hell. And yes, like that's what I made. I made a thing. I like making games that are experiences where people have to sort of bounce off of each other and interact in ways that aren't violent or combative, but are like familiar human interactions. Like the practice of cohabitating with someone is a complicated and nuanced relationship and dynamic. And
Amen,
I'm really
brother.
interested
Yeah.
in like how that translates to like game mechanics and like game relationships.
Yeah. So that hits on a really interesting point, and maybe I'm going to hop around a little bit. You know, the whole idea here is that most people, at least from the tabletop side of things, have gone into the hobby because they play Dungeons and Dragons.
Sure.
Like Dungeons and Dragons, especially 5th edition, is like the gateway drug into the tabletop universe. And there's so many different games that can be available. And sometimes I believe when somebody thinks of playing D&D, you said like non-violent interactions, right? So like they think of the fighter hitting the goblin with the sword, right? Lord of the Rings style, which there's definitely an interest, right? There's a little bit of nostalgia there because of people's pop culture and what they like to read and and the tropes of a fantasy epic fantasy. But what are some of the things that you believe that we can learn from games like yours, where we're just taking normal human interactions? How can that also be seen in a tabletop? I know some tabletop games that already do that. There was one that came out where you were retired adventurers, basically
Yeah.
in D&D. I think it was called Stew Pot or something like that.
I'm not familiar with that one.
Yeah, you're retired adventurers and you're basically creating meals in an inn. So instead of
I
going
love
out and
that.
adventuring, you're providing the food for all of them. And there's mechanics for making meals and stuff. So I'm going to go back to the original question I meant to say is, what can we learn about going beyond just the fighting and bringing in normal human interactions?
So much of why people play games, and I know why I play games, I suspect why you play games, are the people. And I love a good solo game, whether it's a video game or a tabletop game. I love a solo experience, like a nice, like, thinky thing. I make myself a cup of coffee and set up a game and just move some bits around on the table and just have like a nice, like, meditative, reflective experience with myself. But so much of what I associate about playing games is the people. So it's always felt a little weird to me when games are like building these experiences around the stuff on the table, and it's like, look how clever the stuff on the table is, but it's not engaging with the most interesting thing that's at the table, which is the people. I want to talk to people. I want to explore this thing, like this weird system that we've all agreed to engage with for the next hour or two. I want to know how you feel about it. And like if it's eliciting any emotional reactions in you, or like memories, or like things it reminds you of. Like, I don't want to just push wood around with people for 2 hours. And I think that's one of the things that board games are still kind of learning how to do, but RPGs have done better for a longer time. And I say that, like, there's some generalization there. Of course, there's board games that have explored this that have been around for a while, but like, it's becoming a newer thing for the board game side to say, hey, let's worry less about the points and the systems and more about the interactions and the way people are talking to each other, the things we're saying to each other, the questions we're asking each other. Board games have sort of lived in a weird binary for a while, where they're either strictly competitive or strictly cooperative. And I think that's kind of framed how board game players interact with each other in games. They sit down and they're like, okay, one person is going to win, and that is going to guide all of our interactions over the course of this. Like,
in the end, there can be only one.
And I just don't think that's how we actually behave in the world. I don't think it's a very good, like, simulation of how people actually are. If you think of the things in your day-to-day life where you are the single victor, it's like sports and applying for jobs are like the only things I can think of where like you are the one true like winner in a situation. There just aren't a lot of things where like one person is the best. And I think that's something that RPGs have been doing better for a long time, is like really digging more into the ways, exploring the dynamics and stories and relationships of players more than outcomes. You can't really win D&D.
Yes, we're all winners.
There are those who try.
Yeah, but like,
There are those that try. You've made a very good point, though, like the collaborative storytelling. And I think this is where people can, for my audience, for the listener listening right now who wants to be a GM who fosters that kind of interaction, it is about making sure that the people at the table, you're really a facilitator of those conversations. And I think some of the good games that have come out in the past 5 to 10 years have made it very easy to facilitate those kinds of conversations as the GM. And it takes the load off of the GM, I would say, and puts it onto the players to be the owners of their destiny, or the owners of the story that everybody wins if they tell it well.
Exploring relationships and player dynamics and things like outside of combat. If your entry point to all of this is something like D&D, I haven't watched it yet, but Dimension 20, it's on Dropout. If you're listening to this and you have not subscribed to Dropout yet, I can't recommend it enough. I think it's like $60 a year. It's just great. It's one of, like, low key, like one of the best streaming services out there right now. But one of the shows on Dropout is Dimension 20. They do tabletop RPGs. Mostly use like homebrew D&D systems. Occasion, I think they've done a little bit of Blades. Right, like I think they've done some Blades. I think they've done a few. I think they've done some Kids on Bikes adjacent stuff.
Yeah, Brendan Lee Mulligan. Most of their stuff is on. Some of their earlier seasons are on YouTube.
Yes,
and I think that's another gateway drug to try to say, hey, come listen to all the other really awesome stuff as we've developed our craft. So I agree, it's pretty cool.
But there was one of the seasons of Dimension 20 uses D&D as the core system, but instead of doing like physical combat, all of the like quote unquote combat interactions are conversations. They're like fighting, they're like bickering, or they're like trying to navigate like a tricky like sort of a political intrigue type conversation. Like I haven't watched the season, so if you are listening to this and you have watched it and I'm totally missing the mark on it, I don't know the name of the season, but I do know that like a lot of the what would typically be a combat scenario in a regular D&D campaign, in this campaign, is not physical combat. It's like your ability to navigate a conversation, whether you could like win or manipulate a conversation in a way that gives you the outcome that works well for your party or you as an individual. And I think stuff like that is so cool. That's so exciting to me. Like thinking about language and conversation as a tool in a game. And I'm not even necessarily opposed to like a good, like, swords and shields dungeon crawler beat 'em up. Like I have nothing against it.
Yeah.
I just think there's so much more opportunity for storytelling when you pivot the focus a little bit.
And that's the misconception, right, that we're knocking out here. Is it's not all about fighting, even though, one of my absolute favorite conversations I've ever had is with Robin D. Laws, who is a game designer. Wonderful conversation I had with him back on episode 16. And he really talked about how in his books, he talks about what people are looking for when they're coming to play a game.
Yeah.
And you have some people who are butt kickers and they just want to kick butt. Like that's why they're there. But you also have people that really enjoy that social interaction.
Yeah, totally.
And you have the person that just wants to eat your snacks while they're sitting at your house. So
yeah.
The casual gamer, the snack eater.
Cookie! Nom nom nom. Oh, nom 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 nom. Ah.
What are some lesser known games, tabletop games, maybe a combination of tabletop and board game, because you mentioned that there is crossover and has started to be crossover more and more, that you feel have profoundly influenced you, or may influence others, just for having them hear this on this podcast? They'd be like, oh my gosh, I got to go play that. What are games that you feel are that?
If you are trying to find a way to enter this world and you want to start with some like weird, cool, fun, interesting things, Chris, who runs I can never remember how to pronounce his last name. His first name is Chris. He publishes games as Junk Food Games. He's a wonderful person, and he makes really interesting tabletop games, but he also like board games, but he also does a lot of really experimental RPG type things. So a lot of like solo writing and journaling type things, one page RPGs, things that are like played on like a handful of cards. A lot of his stuff is on itch, like itch.io, that you can get him on there. But I think he's exploring a really exciting place in the RPG space where he's coming at things from like a board game and RPG background, but all of his stuff feels very approachable and it's not locked into any specific systems. He's like building these things all himself, and it's all designed for people who have never done this before. Like, you don't need to be really familiar with how these things work to enjoy one of Chris's games.
I love games like that.
They're just cool. Like, they're like, I'm in his Discord right now looking at some of the stuff he's working on. There's a game that I think he just got the test prints for them. Oh no, he's like got them. I think he might be selling it now. It's called Moon Rings. This is his Chris, I'm giving you free promo, buddy.
Going in the show notes.
Let's do it. Moon Rings. This looked really cool to me. It comes in like a little spiral bound book. The cursed blood moon hangs over this land always. You're a witch and cannot abide by its reign any longer. You've used your magics to find a hidden labyrinth said to hide rings which contain power to control the moon. I'm looking at this book right now. Like, it's just like a cool little book that you work your way through. So he just like does stuff like this. Like, it's not quite a board game, not quite an RPG. It's just this like really unique experience that you have. That's like a storytelling thing that hopefully you have like a meaningful moment with, and you could take it, maybe pass it on to someone else when you're done with it. But there's so many people doing things like this.
Yeah.
I would say someone who is like directly impacted me is Zoe Allred. Zoe is a designer who a lot of Zoe's work has been in the space of something that like is so new to tabletop and board games that like there hasn't really been like a term for it yet, or like a genre named. So like Zoe and a few other folks, myself included, have had to like kind of come up with like what we're actually going to even call these types of games. So we're calling them things like victorless games, unranked games, multi-victor games. These are games that are pretty specifically like board games, but they interrupt that binary that I was talking about earlier, where like these are not strictly single victor competitive games or co-op games. They're games that are more simulate like what human interactions actually look like, where multiple people could win as long as their objectives are all fulfilled, or maybe even there are no win conditions. No one wins. The game just sort of ends, and the end state is talking about the experience you all shared. Seeing the work that Zoe has been doing on these types of games has been really inspiring to me. Zoe and another friend of mine, Matthew Hawker, have started a publishing company called Lunar Punk Games, and this is their whole thing. Like, they've kind of pledged that like all of the games they're going to put out are going to be games like this that like play around with deconstructing the like co-op single victor binary that tabletop games have lived in. Just like doing weird, interesting things with like, what does a game mean when it ends? What does winning mean? What does victory look like? How are we defining these things? Are we even using points? Why are we using points? What do points mean in a board game? Usually nothing. So like they're just doing wild stuff with this, and that has been incredibly inspiring to me as I've sort of reinvented what Roommates was into this new game that it's becoming. Like, the game that it is now pretty cleanly lands in this like multi-victor unranked structure. It's cool. It's cool and exciting. It's also like tough to talk about because the language doesn't really exist yet.
I can tell you're trying, like, really, but you're doing a very good job. Honestly, what I was thinking of, there's an episode of Seinfeld, and I'm not super Seinfeld-y, but I do remember this. They were stuck in a parking garage and they couldn't get out. And they just kept wandering around the garage, and they were bumping into all these weird people. I think there was a goldfish that died.
Where's the car? Well, I thought it was here. You don't know where we parked?
For you Seinfeld people out there, I'm sorry if I got it all wrong. But that would be a scenario where they're like, what, you won by getting out of a parking garage that a normal human being should be able to do in like 5 minutes? Like, but that experience of being lost and not knowing where, to me, that would be an interesting concept for a game. Yeah, that's a game. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, that's it, right? That's the whole thing. Zoe has a really good video called The Emperor's High Score. So it's like a 30-minute video essay that sort of explains this entire thing of like, what if games just didn't have points? What if it was just like the things you were doing were the thing that had meaning? The interactions you were having with other players were the thing that have meaning. And that video that Zoe made, combined with some video essays by another designer, Amabel Holland, her video essays are wonderful. If you're looking for really good, thoughtful considerations of like the ways games communicate to us, highly recommend Amabel's work. The two of them have really dug around in this space and made some like really interesting games, but also put together some really compelling arguments for how board games could learn a lot from RPGs, and just be a little more flexible with how they're structured and tell stories.
Yeah, that when you were talking about, there are certain tabletop games that come to mind where it's about the journey, not necessarily the destination, but there also is that de-escalation period at the end of the game. I was just talking with another creator, a Guy Milner. He has a blog called Burn After Running, which is all about one-shot games. How do you run a game at a convention? How do you run a game that's only meant to be run once? And a lot of these characters that are pulled out of these games, you never play them again.
Yeah.
Right? They're just for that session. And so one of the ways that Guy suggested being able to make that a well-rounded experience with the full story arc is you have that de-escalation period. Well, what did they do after?
Yeah.
You know, that vignette at the very end, like, what does that look like for the rest of their life that we may never get to know?
Totally.
So that's where I'm seeing the crossover here in some of these games where it may not be a winner, but you get to finish the story.
It would be a dream for me if this game that I'm working on, if after players finished it, they took the characters that they were over the course of this game and then just plugged them into their favorite RPG system.
Yeah.
And, like, they just continued the story. Like, what happened after this week? Like, what did we do afterwards? The board game is really, like, it is very strictly, like, 10 turns that take place over the course of 5 days. In that week, you will learn about how you all interact with each other, what all of your personal goals are. I think there's enough content that will happen organically in that game for you to define a player or like define a character for yourself. So I would love if people took that and just ran with it and like really owned and lived in this person that they've made. That would be so exciting to me if that was the outcome of this game, even though it is like a board game and I am not an RPG designer. I just think we should be doing more stuff like that.
Well, cross-compatible.
Yeah.
I think that there's a big opportunity there to say, here's a game that can help create your tabletop role-playing characters. Dungeon Crawl Classics, DCC, they have you start out as basically, I think in the video game world, they're called mooks. They're just like the people that you kill to level up.
Sure, yeah.
Basically, you start out as one of them. You're usually a peasant or somebody super low level, real squishy.
Sure.
You know, anybody can take you out. And you're going through a funnel of danger. And when you get to the other side, a lot of times people would and will take the characters out of those very low level situations and then move them on into an actual campaign of, let's say, D&D 5e. So like, I think the cross compatibility is a really cool concept that I haven't seen yet.
There's a board game called Role Player that I think in theory it is like, what if the character creation was the game?
Oh, that's cool.
I think like that's kind of the pitch for it.
So my eyes just need to be open. There are games that exist like this.
These things do exist, and I've played Role Player.
They do exist.
They do exist.
He does exist!
They do exist.
Role Player is a cool game. It works really well as a standalone experience. I don't know enough about RPG systems. I think it like the character that comes out the other end of it, I think you could probably really only feasibly use that character in something like a traditional D&D or maybe Pathfinder campaign. It's like pretty like dungeon crawlery in its like tone and presentation.
So when you were talking about how your game is played, how Roommates is played, or, you know, as it was called, games are not made in a box. Well, they end up in a box, but they are made through play testing, and people test your games and give you feedback, and you make iterations. And just like any feedback, you have to decide what feedback is worth changing the game over and what is not. Can you talk a little bit about your game testing process with your personal game?
In college, my major was studio art, and one of my mentors in college was a professor named Claudia Esslinger, and one of the things that she taught me was that good art should be compelling, surprising, and sustaining. What is the thing that brings you into it? What is the thing that keeps you engaging with the art? And then what is the thing that, like, when you walk away from it, you feel like you sort of caught you off guard or subverted your expectations or has you thinking about it afterwards? And when I'm designing a game, I think I have started, like if I went in my Google Drive folder of all the game ideas I've had, I think I have started about 15 or 16 different games. I have play tested 5 of those with people. those are the only games I've even like described to people. Like I don't even tell my friends about the things I'm working on until I feel confident that the game or the idea even can respond to the prompt of what about this is compelling, what about it is sustaining, and what about it is surprising. If it can't answer all three of those questions, I stop working on the game. And I big caveat to this, like if you're listening to this and you're thinking about getting into game design, I wouldn't necessarily encourage you to start designing games this way or even like use this as a part of your process, because it can really hinder the amount of output you have. Like if everything is going through that level of like self-scrutiny before you're even getting things in front of people. I'm lucky enough to be in a position where I don't rely on game design as a full-time career and source of income, so I don't need to be prolific. I can work really slowly and intentionally. But I don't like putting things in front of people until I feel confident that even though the game isn't done, there's something really special there. That like the core concept is really strong and is going to provide an impactful experience for people. So like that's the starting point. And then from there, it's just lots and lots of testing. I've got a handful of communities and events and things that I go to play test games. I do a lot of play testing online, specifically in 2 different Discord servers I'm in. One of them is Break My Game. The other is Protospiel Online. Protospiel is convention. Protospiel Online specifically is an online-based tabletop playtesting convention. Happens 3 times a year. It is great. I used to help. I used to be involved in helping run it. I've taken a step back recently to focus on some big life things that are happening over the next few weeks. But I hope to, jump back in and be a part of that soon. But those 2 communities are so cool and supportive. And because it's online and everything's digital, you could do a lot of like really rapid iterating and feedback, get feedback really fast from lots of people far outside of your local group. I get a good amount of playtesting done in there. And then in terms of the in-person stuff, I rely pretty heavily on the Unpub network, which is they do a major in-person convention outside of Baltimore every year. But then they also have kind of pop-up areas in most of the major conventions in the US that have a tabletop presence. So like they're definitely at PAX Unplugged. They're at Origins. I think they also do PAX East and West. There's a few other ones they go to. You could find all of them on the Unpub website. But that is like an awesome, awesome group of people. A lot of we mentioned Wingspan earlier. Wingspan was a game that came out of the Unpub network. Like Elizabeth brought that game to Unpub events for a few years, and then eventually got picked up, and now it is what it is. I was actually at the Unpub, and one of my playtest blocks for the game I'm working on, like I happened to be like seated next to Elizabeth's table where she was trying out like playtesting her new thing that she's working on. So like all of these people who make your games, like we all know each other. We're all like working on each other's stuff. We're all helping each other out. It's a very tight, small community of really supportive, good people. And that kind of brings me back to like the question of like these things, 1 or 2 designers' names will get put on the box at the end of the day, but that's a fraction of the people who were involved in making these things real. Like there's so many people. Games are not made by a single person. If you are not listening to people when you are running your playtests, you're not really designing. You're making something, but like, who's it for? If it's just for you, it goes back to the thing we were saying earlier, where like you play games with people. Like, games are for people. So if you're not designing with people in mind, I'm not really sure I understand what the point is. You're just making really elaborate math problems. Which is cool. That's cool, but like, I just don't really see what the point is if you're not going to get people involved. That's the joy of it to me, is sharing that experience with other people and building something together. There's no way any of my games would be where they are now if I didn't have all the people in my life who had given me feedback and supported these projects and play tested and, you know, pulled up a chair at a convention when I was like just like doodling something on a notepad, and they came up and they're like, yeah, I was thinking about that thing we were talking about. Do you have like 10 minutes to just like jam on that a little bit? And like, none of that's just how this stuff happens. And, you know, you asked like, how do you know what to listen to, what to not listen to? You learn, you know. I think it's important to know what your goalposts are, know what you're trying to accomplish. And then when you get a piece of feedback that you're not really sure how to interact with, or maybe doesn't feel good to hear, or it's just like a challenging piece of feedback, you can always go back to those goalposts and say, like, how does this fit into what I've defined for myself as the objective of this game? I like to design games around feelings and moments and not themes and mechanics. So I really wanted to design a game where people felt compelled to say thank you. So I created systems and mechanics and themes that supported people saying thank you to each other over the course of the game.
Built-in gratitude. That's kind of nice.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, and I think like that any time where I got a piece of feedback that felt like it was butting heads with that goal, I would sit and think about it for a little bit. But if it really felt like it would prevent that goal from happening or would get in the way of that, then it probably just wasn't a note that I could or would want to pursue. A thing designers share with each other, like a little sort of piece of wisdom, is like, playtesters are often right about how they feel about a game, but they're not right about how to fix it. They'll be able to tell you about what's wrong, like what didn't work. But when they offer suggestions, the suggestion maybe isn't the right way to solve the problem. Sometimes it is, but it often isn't, because what they're offering is how they would solve the problem. And it's not really a playtester's job to fix your game. It's their job to tell you how they responded to it. So I try to, like, when I'm listening to feedback and interpreting what I want to use and what I don't want to use, I try to keep that in mind of like, what are they telling me about their experience? Not what are they telling me that they want to see as a solution.
That is super cool.
Sorry, that was like a very long.
No, I'm going to take that in my own life. Like, that's I need to use this as like parenting advice sometimes, like with my kids. This is great. You know, I'm gonna backtrack to a question that I skipped over because I think you brought it up, right? A lot of these communities are online.
Yeah.
A lot of these communities that you've been able to do these rapid fire test sessions with are online communities. And, for tabletop, that's Roll20, that's Foundry VTT. For the actual virtual tabletops, it's Discord, it's Zoom, it's using all of these different things to interact. For board games, I know a few, but I don't know all of them. I had friends that tried to get me on Board Game Arena, Tabletop Simulator, which I think I bought for $20 and never went back on.
Yeah, sure.
For different reasons. Shouldn't say obvious reasons. Some people probably love it. How do you envision like the role of these digital tools and platforms merging into what was once only a physical experience, sitting around an actual table with other people?
Yeah. There's two ways I can answer this question, and I'll try to keep both of them as brief as possible. But if you haven't
on your mind,
if you haven't picked up on it yet, brevity is like sometimes a problem for me. As a designer, the digital platforms are a huge barrier lift on getting people making games and getting feedback. Before these types of tools existed, you had to pay for the tools and equipment, like physical objects. You had to have a printer, you had to have, paper and cardstock, and you had to have some way to get to a playtesting event. And a lot of these events happen at conventions. So surprise, now you've got to have a couple $100 and you've got to have a hotel room, which, okay, so now we're looking at an $800 weekend to play my game that may never become a reality. And even if it does become a reality, guess how much I'm making on royalties on that game? Not enough to justify going to every single convention in the US doing this. So it's a prohibitively expensive thing to get into. It's really, really hard to get into doing this if you are just doing the physical thing. And that's not even getting into like accessibility stuff. Like if I am someone who uses a wheelchair, or I have mobility needs, or I am deaf or hard of hearing, or have vision needs, like things that can be assisted with like screen readers and hearing aids, spaces that like folks who use wheelchairs, like conventions are getting better about it, but like it's really hard to move around a convention center in a wheelchair. It's
hard enough when you don't have a wheelchair.
Yeah, it's like it. So there are limitations to what the physical playtesting and game spaces are able to offer. And with moving things online, or the addition of things going online, it has opened up a massive slew of designers and players and voices that were not really getting a seat at the table. And that is so exciting. Some folks maybe spend a little too much time designing exclusively digitally. They aren't getting their game to a physical format soon enough. So people will design games that play really well digitally, but they're not thinking about like if they want this to be a physical thing that someone plays on their table, how is this going to work? Like, are these cards going to be readable? How much is this going to cost to manufacture? Like, you've got 100 dice in this game. You can't sell that for the price point that you want to make this game at. Like, all of that kind of stuff. Like, I have to put a certain number of tokens on a card. Well, that might work really well digitally because I can create a nice neat and tidy stack with a snap point that they all jump onto. But like, what's that going to look like on a table where these are now all loose components that are just like falling over each other? And I think some people maybe overplay the extent to which like games are existing now that have been like poorly play tested in physical space. I've seen some people kind of get like really up in arms about this, that there's this like wild influx of games that like they just never even bothered to test this on a real table. I don't think that's true, but there are some games that like I've played in the last few years that I've thought, you didn't test this physically as much as you should have. And if you intend for something to exist as a physical product, you do need to test it physically. So I think that's like really, to me, one of the only major downsides of pivoting the design world into the physical space, is like some folks just aren't leveraging that in, they're maybe relying on it too much. It's also challenging as a designer. Like you lose a lot of context if things are digital. Like most of the playtests I'm in, maybe we'll be on camera at the beginning, but then we all turn our cameras off like while we're playing because we're like focusing on the screen. So now I can't see your body language. I can't see like all of the like visual cues that I would get from someone like while I'm watching them during a playtest. Like I'm making notes about like how often are they lifting up reference cards to like remind themselves of rules. How often are they like looking bored, or like they're checking out, or are they looking at their phones? Are they like having side conversations with people like about the game? Like are they whispering like plans to each other? Like you can't do that really digitally. So you lose some of that. But generally speaking, I think as a designer, the digital platforms have opened up more opportunities for folks wanting to get into this, and more opportunities for connections and enjoying games with people.
What do you think about as a player?
Yeah.
Because from the tabletop perspective, a lot of the things that you were talking about as an obstacle with the physical pieces, tabletop games don't always have that obstacle. I mean, there are minis, right? And that's a whole thing that people can get into depending on the level of physicality you want with your tabletop game. You know, dungeon, I can't remember the name of the company that makes the beautiful like dungeon pieces and all of that. But for the most part, most games for tabletop can be just done theater of the mind.
Right.
And that then, you know, I do think we do share the obstacle of not being able to see each other when people turn off their screens. I was a part of a really cool Starfinder 2nd edition playtest at the beginning of or the end of 2024. And I jumped on the game and I had my camera on and I was super ready. My buddy Jonathan ran the game, friend of the pod, and I was nobody had their camera on.
Yeah.
And they were like, Clint, you can have your camera on if you want, but we usually turn off the camera. And I'm like, oh, okay. And it was still a blast.
Yeah.
But I could see how for somebody designing the game, looking for those interactions and emotions, that would be difficult.
It's tricky. It can be tricky. And you get used to it, and the digital playtests are really good for stress testing systems. Like, does this just work on a mechanical level? Like, is the math right? If your game has a lot of math, like that kind of stuff. It can be good for like testing iconography and language. Player feel can be a trickier thing. I think as a player, I really like Board Game Arena. I like that I can run an asynchronous game with my friends back in Chicago, and we can just have that running for over the course of the week. And, you know, I get an email saying it's your turn, and then I take my turn, and then nothing happens until I get another email.
With your email to their email.
I really like that. I like that it means I can always be playing a game and always have something running in the background. And that's really fun to me. I like that Board Game Arena does a lot of the admin for you, so you don't have to worry about the physics engine thing of like a tabletop simulator or tabletop playground or Tabletopia, like where you've got to physically move things around in a 3D space. I don't particularly like playing games that way. They can be useful tools for designing games, because they give you a lot of flexibility as a designer. But I don't really like playing games in those 3D platforms. My favorite platform for designing and playing, if it is going to be in the sort of like free form, like isn't enforcing rules type thing, because that's the other thing. Like BGA enforces the rules for you. Board Game Arena it enforces all the rules for you. It does all of the admin for you. It's great. Tabletop Simulator, Tabletop Playground, Tabletopia, they do not. It is as if you set up a game on your table in your living room. Hopefully you know what to do with it. Like, it's just there, and it's in a 3D environment. Tabletop Playground is my favorite of those three. I think it's like pretty cool, and it's underrated of the three. If you have to design or play a game that like needs a 3D environment, because some games do that, like verticality and things like that can be important in some games. Tabletop Playground is my favorite of those three. But if I'm going to play or design in a platform that is the sort of like it's set up on the table and you need to know how to engage with it, the one I use is ScreenTop. It's 2D. It runs in your browser. It is free for your first like 3 games. I love ScreenTop. I do pay for it, because I use it enough that I'm like, yeah, I'll pay. I got in at like an early bird rate. I paid like $5 a month for it. It's easily worth it for me. But it doesn't cost you anything as a player. So if your friend designed a game and they put it on ScreenTop, they just send you the link and you could jump in and anything that can run a web browser, you can play their game on ScreenTop. It's awesome. I love it. It's not my preferred way to play board games. Like, I would much rather play them physically or on Board Game Arena. But Board Game Arena is really only for published games. The assumption is that the game is done.
Yeah.
You're not putting like a prototype on there. It's too much work to like iterate a prototype on there. You have to do all the coding and everything, and it just doesn't happen. We're in a really interesting and scary time for the industry right now with the ongoing tariff conversations. We're already seeing a lot of publishers close. Greater Than Games, who make a game called Spirit Island, one of the most popular and successful board games of the last few years, they closed last week. They cannot afford to make their games anymore. So I know a handful of designer friends who have had contracts pulled because the publishers can't guarantee that their games will be made, so they've just canceled them. I know lots of people who have lost their jobs. The physical gaming world, whether these tariffs continue or not, has already been irreversibly impacted. And a thing that I could see coming from this is games going direct to these digital platforms until things either settle down a bit or there's some like certainty about a release plan. I think we're going to see more of that. Like, games just like, this is a board game. It was intended to be a board game, but we can't make it anymore. So this is what you're going to get for now.
Yeah, there's been a mass exodus, I think, to the PDF for tabletop role-playing games.
Yeah.
And I love a good book. Like, I have my Craig Shipman, who I interviewed on the pod. We talk about our wall of shame.
Yeah.
I have like a desk of shame underneath here. It's just all my tabletop books that
Yeah.
I love, and I'll never play them with anybody, but I love looking at the art.
Yeah. Yeah.
Holding it in my hand.
It's like if you have a vinyl collection, like so much of the experience is like holding that thing and like looking at it and experiencing the physical object. I don't think games as physical objects are ever going to go away. They've existed for thousands of years. We're not going to stop doing that as a species. It is already too difficult to make these things exist. We do not have the means to manufacture them in the United States. There are like 2 or 3 manufacturers who can do it, and they can make things out of cardstock and cardboard. All of those like plastic miniatures and things, that's injection plastic molding. Like we just don't have, there is nowhere that can do it. It's not a well, go find it. Like, no, it does not exist. I hate to like think of the situation through the framework of like a silver lining, because I don't think silver linings exist in situations where people are losing their jobs or having projects they were financially relying on having the rug pulled out from underneath them. I don't think that there's nothing good about that. But I think an outcome that we are going to see is that this challenge is going to force people to be creative about how games exist. And that creativity is going to rely on digital platforms, I think, and digital distribution, more print and play stuff. I think we're going to be seeing a lot more print and play. We're going to see a lot more things that rely on you owning games in your collection already and maybe scavenging parts from those other games and then downloading rule books. I know a few people who are working on things like that.
This sounds like a game in itself.
Yeah.
One of our human experience games that we can make.
Yeah.
We could call it Tariffs.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, it's forcing some creativity and pivots in ways that no one wants, but people rely on this as their job. So they need to come up with a plan. There's a lot of strength that I see in the digital platforms, but I think in the next few years, especially the next few months, we're going to see people really relying on them as a major form of distribution. My day job is in community. I'm in game design communities. We've talked already about how community is what built the games I work on and the games that my friends are working on. So much of what makes a good community is compassion and empathy. I think those are the things that drive the game experiences that I make as well. And I think they're the things that help tell the most interesting stories in RPGs, because when we're empathetic and compassionate, that's when we're like really hearing and like seeing each other and listening and navigating relationships, either like in our lives or on the table. So the 10-word experience, or 10-word
it'll be
phrase,
an experience.
My 10-word experience, my 10-word phrase was be a curious and compassionate ambassador for impactful gaming experiences.
Staying curious it opens a lot of doors.
Yeah.
This podcast happened because I was curious about all the people who love this hobby and what they have to say. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of really cool people. Like, you're an excellent human being. I never would have gotten to talk to you in this way had I not allowed that curiosity to unfold. So
yeah.
Can you say it just one more time
yes.
for everybody so that we can
yes.
really remember?
Be a curious and compassionate ambassador for impactful gaming experiences.
I'll let that simmer. What else? Is there anything else that we've missed that you feel like it would be a shame if you didn't say it?
Board games have been so locked into tradition, and I think RPGs have been a little bit too. Like some folks feel like D&D is the only option out there. It's the only system they can jump into. I think I would challenge anyone listening to this to use that as an opportunity to be curious. That's what I'm trying to say with this phrase, is like, ask about what else is out there. Why do you feel like it's that way, that like D&D is the only thing? Like, what are the things that led to that being your assumption? There's reasons. There are reasons why D&D is the thing that everyone knows about. Not all of those reasons are good. Same thing with board games. There's a lot of reasons why board games have traditionally a single victor structure. Zoe says it way better than I will in the video I mentioned earlier. So if you're interested in like the history and like sort of theory of why games are like that, I think Zoe brings up some really compelling arguments. Videos like that and videos like what Amabel has written and these conversations we've had, they come out of curiosity. Why is this like this? And why could things be different? Could things be better? Could I make things different or better? Could I design a game? Could I show my friends a new experience? Always ask yourself questions and be curious. I think that's when the most exciting and meaningful moments can happen. Aside from that, I don't know if there's anything.
I think you hit it on the head, man.
Did I do it?
Yeah, you did it. You did the thing. Like, you did the thing. It was awesome. Last thing, where can people find you? Where can they connect with you if they loved what they heard?
Yeah.
Want to see what you're doing? Want to stay curious about what you have and what you're about?
Yeah. On social media, the only social media I'm using these days has been Blue Sky. So you can find me on Blue Sky at davidmasnato.com. The cool thing about Blue Sky is you can verify yourself with your domain name. So that's also my website. So if you want to go to my website, it's davidmasnato.com. A little outdated, admittedly. I need to get some new stuff on there. The game I've been talking about with the witches is like still on there as roommates. So sorry if you go check out my website. It's a little outdated. I've also got some other games that I haven't put on there, but that's a place you can find me. If you want to try some of my stuff, and we're not in the same place physically, hang out in Break My Game, the Break My Game Discord, or Protospiel Online. Those are the two places where I play things on the internet. And then if you're ever at a convention, I will almost definitely be at PAX Unplugged in, I think it's November this year. They moved it from December to November.
21st or the 23rd. My heart is set on also potentially being there. That's
yeah, it is awesome. It's so much fun. So I'm hoping to be there. I also am at, I go to the Unpub event in outside of Baltimore every year. But like, if there is an Unpub room at a convention you're at and I am there, I will be in the Unpub room for most of the convention. So that's a good place to find me and play my stuff. And if you're not sure if I'm there or not, ask one of the members of the Unpub staff, because they will know. But I'm usually PAX Unplugged and the main Unpub festival are like my two main in-person things. Yeah, that's where you can find me.
Well, I hope to see you there. I'm sure some of our people who are listening right now, maybe the listener who's listening right now, will see you there.
I hope so. Yeah, come if you see me. I'm often wearing like a bright yellow beanie. I was about to like find it and lift it up, but then I remembered that this is a podcast and you're not going to see what it looks like. But it's on my profile photo on my social media stuff. It's like I wear a yellow beanie around at most of the conventions.
It's way easy to find a yellow beanie, man.
It's pretty easy to find, although there is like one other bearded white guy who has started walking around with a beanie. And
is it yellow?
It's yellow. and it's a problem.
We need to have a talk.
I know.
This guy.
Someone came up to me at the last PAX and they were like, "There's another one, and the two of you need to like, figure out who it's gonna be." So it's but like I spend most of my time in the unpub room. So like if you see someone in the unpub room wearing a yellow beanie, come over and say hi. But
it
also
could be
like,
David, or it could be the other guy.
Could be me, could be the other guy. Say hi. Tell me where you're coming from. Like that's helpful too. I'm in a lot of places on the internet, and there've been situations where people come up to me and they're like, "Hey, I know you," and I'm like, "I don't know you. Can I get like a little? What do you know me from? Can I get a little more context?" But yeah, I love meeting new people. So please say hello.
Well, David, thanks for being on. Hope to
thank
talk
you.
to you very soon, and we'll have to have you on again. Thanks again.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks so much.
It is a big, wide world out there with so many games other than just Dungeons and Dragons. So if you heard a game that caught your fancy as David and I were talking, feel free to check out the show notes. Every game that's mentioned is down there for you to click, go, and play. Please hit like or subscribe if you enjoyed what you heard today. Maybe dole out some of those stars if you listen on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And may you keep having fun as you have a great time with friends and experience amazing stories through tabletop role-playing games.